of Mice and Men, Chapter 4, page 75. Lenny broke in. You said about them rabbits. Candy leaned against the wall beside the broken collar while he scratched the wrist stump. I've been here a long time, he said, and Crook's been here a long time. This is the first time I've ever been in his room, Crook said darkly. Guys don't come into a colored man's room very much. Nobody been here but Slim. Slim and the boss. Candy quickly changed the subject. Slim's as good a skinner as I ever seen. Lenny leaned toward the old swamper. About them rabbits, he insisted. Candy smiled. I got it figured out. We can make some money on them rabbits if we go about it right. But I get to tend 'em, Lenny broke in. George says I get to tend 'em. He promised. Crooks interrupted brutally. You guys are just kidding yourself. You'll talk about it a hell of a lot, but you won't get no land. You'll be a swamper here till they take you out in a box. Hell, I've seen too many guys. Lenny here'll quit and be on the road in 2-3 weeks. Seems like every guy got land in his head. Candy rubbed his cheek angrily. You goddamn right we're gonna do it. George says we are. We got the money right now. Yeah? Said Crooks. And where's George now? In town in a whorehouse. That's where your money's going. Jesus. I've seen it happen too many times. I've seen too many guys with land in their head. They never get none under their hand. Candy cried. Sure, they all want it. Everybody wants a little bit of land. Not much. Just something that was his. Something he could live on and there couldn't nobody throw him off of it. I never had none. I planted crops for damn near everybody in this state, but they wasn't my crops. And when I harvested them, it wasn't none of my harvest. But we gonna do it now. And don't make no mistake about that. George ain't got the money in town. That money's in the bank. Me and Lenny and George, we gonna have a room to ourselves. We're gonna have a dog and rabbits and chickens. We're gonna have green corn, maybe a cow or a goat. He stopped, overwhelmed with his picture. Crooks asked, you say you got the money? Damn right. We got most of it, just a little bit more to get. Have it all in 1 month. George got the land all picked out too. Crooks reached around and explored his spine with his hand. I never seen a guy really do it, he said. I seen guys nearly crazy with loneliness for land, he said. Oh. But every time a whorehouse or a blackjack game took what it takes, he hesitated. If you guys would want a hand to work for nothing, just as keep, why, I'd come and lend a hand. I ain't so crippled I can't work like a son of a bitch if I want to. Any of you boys seen Curly? They swung their heads toward the door. Looking in was Curly's wife. Her face was heavily made up. Her lips were slightly parted. She breathed strongly, as though she'd been running. Curly ain't been in here, Candy said sourly. She stood still in the doorway, smiling a little at them, rubbing the nails of one hand with the thumb and forefinger of the other. And her eyes traveled from one face to another. They left all the weak ones here, she said finally. Think I don't know where they all went? Even Curly? I know where they all went. So not only is she pestering them, she's letting them know that she knows Curly is stepping out at the whorehouse. That he's got side chick. So why would she make sure that they knew she knew?
That they confirm it, probably.
Maybe that they confirm it. Maybe that it like opens the gate or something to them, like, oh, well, if she knows he's okay, if she's okay with him, then maybe she's okay to flirt with. Lenny watched her fascinated, but Candy and Crooks were scowling down away from her eyes. Candy said, then if you know, why you want to ask us where Curly's at? She regarded them amusedly. Funny thing, she said, if I catch any one man and he's alone, I get along fine with him. But just let two of the guys get together and you won't talk. Just nothing but mad. She dropped her fingers and put her hands on her hips. You're all scared of each other, that's what. Every one of you scared the rest is going to get something on you. After a pause, Crook said, maybe you better go along to your own house now. We don't want no trouble. Well, I ain't giving you no trouble. Think I don't like to talk to somebody every once in a while? Think I like to stick in that house all the time? Candy laid the stump of his wrist on his knee and rubbed it gently with his hand. He said accusingly, you got a husband. You got no call fooling around with other guys, causing trouble. The girl flared up. Sure I got a husband. You all seen him. Swell guy, ain't he? Spends all his time saying what he's gonna do to guys he don't like. And he don't like nobody. Think I'm gonna stay in that 2x4 house and listen how Curly's gonna lead with his left twicked? Just the old 1-2. And twicked. And then bring the old right cross. 1-2, he says, just the old 1-2, and he'll go down. She paused, and her face lost its sullenness and grew interested. Say, what happened to Curly's hand? There was an embarrassed silence. Candy stole a look at Lenny. Then he coughed. Why, Curly, he got his hand caught in a machine, ma'am. Bust his hand. She watched for a moment, and then she laughed. Baloney, what do you think you're selling me? Curly started something he didn't finish. Caught in a machine, baloney. Why, he ain't give nobody the good old 1-2 since he got his hand bust. Who bust him? Candy repeated sullenly. Got it caught in a machine. All right, she said contemptuously. All right, cover him up if you wanna. What do I care? You bindle bums think you're so damn good? What do you think I am, a kid? I tell you, I could have went with shows. Not just one, neither. And a guy told me he could put me in pictures. She was breathless with indignation. Saturday night, everybody out doing something, everybody. And what am I doing? Standing here talking to a bunch of bindle stiffs, an N and a dum-dum, and a lousy old sheep, and liking it because they ain't nobody else. Lenny watched her, his mouth half open. Crooks had retired into the terrible protective dignity of the Negro. Protective dignity, but it's terrible. So if those pictures are in the back of your mind as a black person, you're not going to be talking too much mess to a white lady. Because Crooks knows very well that if he gets put into a tree, no one's going to be helping him. But a change came over old Candy. He stood up suddenly and knocked his nail keg over backward. I had enough, he said angrily. You ain't wanted here. We told you you ain't. And I tell you, you got floozy ideas about what us guys amounts to. You ain't got sense enough in that chicken head to see even that we ain't stiffs. Suppose you get us canned. Suppose you do. You think we'll hit the highway and look for another lousy two-bit job like this? You don't know that we got our own ranch to go to and our own house. We ain't got to stay here. We got a house and chickens and fruit trees and a place 100 times prettier than this. And we got friends. That's what we got. And we got friends. That's what we got. Maybe there was a time when we was scared of getting canned, but we ain't no more. We got our own land, and it's ours, and we can go to it. Curly's wife laughed at him. Baloney, she said. I've seen too many you guys. If you had 2 bits in the world, why, you'd be getting 2 shots of corn with it and sucking the bottom of the glass. I know you guys. Candy's face had grown redder and redder, but before she was done speaking, he had control of himself. He was the master of the situation. I might have knew, he said gently. Maybe you just better go along and roll your hoop. We ain't got nothing to say to you at all. We know what we got, and we don't care whether you know it or not. So maybe you better just scatter along now, 'cause Curly maybe ain't gonna like his wife out in the barn with us bindle stiffs. She looked from one face to another, and they were all closed against her. And she looked longest at Lenny until he dropped his eyes in embarrassment. Suddenly, she said, Where'd you get them bruises on your face? Lenny looked up guiltily. Who, me? Yeah, you. Lenny looked to Candy for help, and then he looked at his lap again. He got his hand caught in a machine. Oh, he got his hand caught in a machine, he said. Curly's wife laughed. Okay, machine. I'll talk to you later. I like machines. Candy broke in. You let this guy alone. Don't you do no messing around with him. I'm going to tell George what he says. George won't have you messing with Lenny. Who's George? She asked. The little guy you come with? Lenny smiled happily. That's him, he said. That's the guy, and he's going to let me tend the rabbits. Well, if that's all you want, I might get a couple rabbits myself. Crooks stood up from his bunk and faced her. I had enough, he said coldly. You got no rights coming in a colored man's room. You got no rights messing around in here at all. Now you just get out, and get out quick. If you don't, I'm going to ask the boss not to ever let you come in the barn no more. She turned on him in scorn. Listen, Ann, she said, you know what I can do to you if you open your trap. Crooks stared hopelessly at her, and then he sat down on his bunk and drew into himself. She closed on him. You know what I could do. Crooks seemed to grow smaller, and he pressed himself against the wall. Yes, ma'am. Well, you keep your place then, Ann. I could get you strung up on a tree so easy it ain't even funny. Crooks had reduced himself to nothing. There was no personality, no ego, nothing to arouse either like or dislike. He said, yes, ma'am, and his voice was toneless. For a moment, she stood over him as though waiting for him to move so that she could whip at him again. But Crooks sat perfectly still, his eyes averted, everything that might be hurt drawn in. She turned at last to the other two. Do you think school districts that had block parties like the ones we just looked at would allow this book to be read in school? I say no, they probably banned it. Not probably, they did ban it. And notice how she can just lord over him. She could say or do anything she wanted and not get in trouble. She turned at last to the other two. Old Candy was watching her, fascinated. If you was to do that, we'd tell, he said quietly. We'd tell about you framing crooks. I like that play on words, framing crooks. Tell and be damned, she cried. Nobody listened to you, and you know it. Nobody listened to you. Candy subsided. No, he agreed. Nobody had listened to us. Lenny whined. I wish George was here. I wish George was here. Candy stepped over him. Don't you worry none, he said. I just heard the guys coming in. George will be in the bunkhouse right now, I bet. He turned to Curly's wife. You better go home now, he said quietly. If you go right now, we won't tell Curly you was here. She appraised him coolly. I ain't sure you heard nothing. Better not take no chances, he said. If you ain't sure, you better take the safe way. She turned to Lenny. I'm glad you bust up Curly a little bit. He got it coming to him. Sometimes I'd like to bust him myself. She slipped out the door and disappeared into the dark barn. And while she went through the barn, the halter chains rattled, and some horses snorted, and some stamped their feet. Crooks seemed to come slowly out of the layers of protection he had put on. Was that the truth, what you said about the guys come back? He asked. Sure, I heard him. Well, I didn't hear nothing. The gate banged, Candy said, and he went on. Jesus Christ, Curly's wife can move quiet. I guess she had a lot of practice, though. Crooks avoided the whole subject now. Maybe you guys better go, he said. I ain't sure I want you in here no more. Colored man gotta have some rights, even if you don't like 'em. Candy said, that bitch didn't ought to have said that to you. It wasn't nothing, Crooks said dully. You guys coming in and sitting made me forget. What she says is true. The horses snored. What she says is true. Ouch. The horses snorted out in the barn and the chains rang and a voice called, Lenny, oh Lenny, you in the barn? It's George, Lenny cried, and he answered, Here, George, I'm right in here. In a second, George stood framed in the door, and he looked disapprovingly about. What you doing in Crooks's room? You hadn't ought to be in here. Crooks nodded. I told them, but they come in anyways. Well, why don't you just kick 'em out? I don't care much, said Crooks. Lenny's a nice fella. Remember, supposedly smart and dumb, and the dumb one doesn't see the skin color? It should be the opposite, right? The smart people shouldn't see skin color. And the dumb people should go, why is your skin brown? But it's not. It's the innocence of Lenny to not judge a book by its cover. And that innocence is something I experience with little kids. You know, little kids don't see color. So what does that mean? You have to teach this stuff to people. You have to actively go about in your daily life teaching this garbage to your children. Totally. Now Candy aroused himself. Oh, George, I've been figuring and figuring. Oh, George, I've been figuring and figuring. I got it doped out how we can even make some money on them rabbits. George scowled. I thought I told you not to tell nobody about that. Candy was crestfallen. Didn't tell nobody but Crooks. George said, well, you guys get out of here. Jesus, seems like I can't go away for a minute. Candy and Lenny stood up and went toward the door. Crooks called, Candy? Huh? Remember that I said about hoeing and doing odd jobs? Yeah, said Candy, I remember. Well, just forget it, said Crooks. I didn't mean it. Just fooling. I wouldn't want to go no place like that. Well, okay, if you feel like that, good night. The three men went out the door. As they went through the barn, the horses snorted and the halter chains rattled. Boy, they keep saying the horses snorted and the halter chains rattled. I wonder why Steinbeck keeps saying that. Crooks sat on his bunk and looked at the door for a moment, and then he reached for the liniment bottle. He pulled out his shirt in the back, poured a little liniment in his pink palm, and reaching around, he fell slowly to rubbing his back.